which I think is even more exciting. So they've sort of been shuffled back and forth. The one on the top, do you accept the possibility that a person of faith who does science could have their faith undermined by what they discover? Could a non-believer be brought to faith by studying science? Ultimately, I think the answer to both of those is no. People who have shaky faith are going to have shaky faith. People who have strong faith are going to have strong faith. My experience has been that no one who wasn't already inclined to believe has ever been convinced by a syllogism. Nor should they. I don't think reason is what attracts people to the faith. And if you talk to people who have been attracted, there's a famous philosopher, I'm forgetting her first name, Maritain. Yes. Who mentions she was a convert, and what attracted her was evidence of the existence of sanctity. She had seen evidence in history of holy people. She had met holy people. And she says if there's holiness in the world, that can't be explained by physics. It's got to be more than physics. One could say the same thing about beauty. One could say the same thing about love. You either are, reduced to the idea that love is nothing but a chemical reaction, in which case, as many people would have fallen in love with me when I was a teenager and fell in love with him. And clearly that didn't happen. So it's more than a chemical reaction. I also think that anyone who is afraid of losing their faith has no faith in their faith. But what will happen is that you will discover that the faith you had was incomplete. Because I hope that's already happened. That the faith you had when you were a child grew as you grew. Changed as you experienced things. If nothing else than to say, and I can remember several times in my own life, when something would occur, I'd get an insight and I'd go, oh, that's what they were talking about. I never knew what that was. Now I do. But it's not that you reject, any more than physics. When physics gets challenged, the kind of challenge you encounter all the time is, I've got this theory, it really works, it's beautiful and elegant, it fits the data. He comes along with new data, which doesn't fit the way I understand the theory. It's rare that I rip up the theory on the basis of one experiment. What really happens is I go, oh, that picture was incomplete. It's always true when these circumstances hold, but then this other circumstance can make me say, wait a minute. Or the idea was basically right, but the place where I was trying to apply it turns out more complicated than I thought. And what happens to a scientist when you know that this is true and you know that that is true and the two don't agree with each other? You don't throw away science. You get excited because you say, I'm about to learn something new. And that's the way it should be in our life of faith, whether we're believers or not believers. We should always be open to be surprised without having that surprise destroy what we already know is true. How do we reconcile the ever-expanding, ever-changing cosmos with the unchanging deposit of faith? The difficulty there is confusing the facts of the universe with the understanding that we have. I think this really is the same answer. Our understanding grows. And I love that wonderful word, deposit of faith, repository of faith. There is, at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, a large building that has every photograph, every image that a spacecraft has ever taken of every planet. And what happens is, 30 years after the mission, someone who has a new idea of planetary processes can go back to the images we have from 30 years ago and see things in them that they never knew to look for before. We can go to the Chinese records of what they called guest stars, and now with 21st century physics say they were seeing supernovae We can actually go to where they saw a guest star and look for the remnant of the supernova. The Chinese had no idea they were observing supernovae, much less that people 2,000 years later would be using their data to get a new understanding. That's what the depository, the repository of faith is. It is this record of God's interaction with people that each one of us can go to and learn something new for us about how God operates. Because here's a difference between science and faith that I think is essential. Science is trying to describe truth, but science is never complete. We never have the truth exactly 100%. There's always more to describe. Science does it using ideas, using models, using theories, which in theory anyone could understand because they were invented by human beings, so human beings can understand them. Science is understanding that approaches truth without ever really completely getting it. Religion, we've been given truths that we never completely understand. So it's truth seeking understanding. Clearly the two are the same, but none of us are big enough to be able to stretch and be entirely in the one and the other. And life is that voyage across from one to the other. How can God be outside an infinite universe? That's because God is not in the universe, except for where God chose to enter the universe. Again, we can only use words that fail because we're talking about something bigger than words. We can only use analogies that fail if you push the analogies too much. But a wonderful analogy that I think I'm stealing from C.S. Lewis, William Shakespeare creates a universe in Romeo and Juliet. He is not in the universe. But if you want to know about William Shakespeare, you'll see what he did to that story that no one else did. And if he had wanted to, he could have written a character named William Shakespeare walking around that universe, who would be the William Shakespeare in the universe, not the same as, but really the same as the William Shakespeare who wrote the play. Within the universe of the play, you won't find William Shakespeare, but he's there in every word. Do you see the analogy of how God creates the universe without being contained inside the universe? Because trust me, there's no character in the play Romeo and Juliet that wrote that play. The Bible was written on Earth. Does it give any reference to life on other planets? Oddly enough, I think it does. And I can be silly and I can be serious. Let me be silly first. John has the famous story of I am the Good Shepherd. And at the end, Jesus says, in the Gospel of John version, of course there are other sheep that I must go to. Most people would say he's talking about the Gentiles, but who knows? Maybe he's talking about other flocks and other planets. That's silly. We do have, in Scripture, marvelous bits of poetry. Well, the book of Baruch has a passage where the prophet is talking about God creating the universe. And at one point, I think it's in chapter 3, it's a short book, the stars sang with joy at the one who created them, shouting, "Here we are." Now, stars don't actually talk. The point is, first of all, what the prophet is telling us is that the stars are not gods. The stars are creatures made by the same God who made us. Chesterton has a wonderful phrase at one point where he says, Earth isn't our mother, Earth is our sister. Even more, our little dancing sister. One that we can love as well as laugh at. The stars are creatures created just like we're created. And in the eyes of the prophet Baruch, there's nothing startling about them also having a relationship with God. There's nothing startling in the history of Judaism, Christianity, or Islam of there being angels who have had to make a choice, some of whom chose and were judged in a way that was completely different from the judgment of what happened to human beings. Now, if you want to be sort of lefty soft about all this, you could say, well, it's just symbolic. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you think they're actual creatures or a poetic way of trying to describe something that is otherwise outside of words. The point is, the writers of our tradition are not at all afraid to say that there are creatures other than human beings in a relation to God. The only time that you find people insisting that human beings are the only creatures out there is the Enlightenment, the humanists. They're the ones who refuse to believe that rocks fall out of the sky, what we call meteorites. They're the ones who really refuse to believe that God actually acts in the universe. They have a deist God who wound things up and then walked away. We call that, that kind of father is a deadbeat dad. So there's no reason to insist that God only created human beings. On the other hand, as a scientist, I don't have the data. People ask me, do you believe that there's life elsewhere in the universe? And I say, that's exactly right. I believe, because I don't have the data. The opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. I need faith precisely because I do doubt, because I'm not sure. That's, Anne Lamott said that, but actually Paul Tillich said it first. And science only operates because a scientist will have the faith to say, I think this is what's going on, but I'm not sure, let me check it out. If you don't think that's what's going on, you're not going to waste your time checking it out. I think it's worthwhile looking for life on other planets, even though we don't have any data. I don't think it's worthwhile spending my life hunting and chasing down UFOs. You'd say there's just as much data for the one as the other. In fact, there are people who even said, yeah, it doesn't match, it doesn't give me the ring of truth. It doesn't fit the cosmology that I have in my head. And maybe I'm wrong, but you know, if you want to go out and prove me wrong, feel free. I'm not going to stop you from chasing UFOs. I got better things to do. I'm not going to stop anybody working at the Vatican Observatory from spending some time looking for life elsewhere, even though it may be a fool's mission. The way you do those sorts of things, though, is you try to work out a research program that will give you worthwhile results, even if your hunch turns out to be wrong. Because sometimes a negative result can be just as powerful as a positive. Might the way we choose to treat aliens change our treatment of other animals, like as a food source? When I was in Kenya, there are a lot of Asians who live in Kenya, a lot of South Asians, and there's a Sikh temple that's in Voi, halfway between Nairobi and Mombasa, and the Sikhs are famous for hospitality. Anyone who shows up at a Sikh temple, they'll get fed. They'll be taken care of. And so it's a wonderful thing when you're a tourist to sort of pull in and they give you a little bit of beans and rice. And we were shown around the Sikh temple by this teenager, Campus Crusade for Singe or something like that. It was new for me. I knew more about the Sikh religion than he did. And he was pointing out, of course, a very important part of their religion is that they're vegetarians. And to prove that this was correct, he goes, all of the greatly, deeply religious people in every religion have been vegetarians. Buddha was a vegetarian. Moses was a vegetarian. Jesus was a vegetarian. Wait a minute, didn't, Jesus ate fish and Moses ate lamb? Well, they would have been vegetarians if they'd known. There are a lot of good reasons if you want to be a vegetarian. I'm not going to criticize them. A lot of good things, and we could comment at length about how we abuse and mistreat animals and how we don't treat food well. But the fundamental idea that we can live without harming the environment fundamentally is wrong. Every breath you take is expelling carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Every place you trod, the earth groans with the weight of every person. The only way we can justify that is to be people who add to the earth more than we take away. And what we add to the earth is essentially the things that the earth can't provide by itself. beauty, love, care for it and for each other. And that's why it's essential, I think, to be as good a person as you can be. And not think that, oh, if I don't hurt the earth so much, I don't have to be such a good person, because then I don't have as much, sin to do. It doesn't work that way. God chose us to be of this planet. What about settling planets? What is the church's stand? The church doesn't have a stand, first of all. I've worked at the Vatican. There are 1.2 billion Catholics and 500 people at the Vatican trying to keep track of it. Imagine if the government in London were proportionately as small. There'd be about 50 people working in the government there, or less. The church doesn't have stands on things. And anybody who pretends that I speak for the Vatican when I say, there was somebody asking me about a particular variant of condensation theory in the early solar system. And what's the official church's stand? And I said, well, I'm the only one at the church who cares about it. And I think it's, equilibrium. Oh, the church doesn't. No, it doesn't. I was making a joke. The real church stand? We don't know. We don't know. Let's find out. And that's settlement about humans on other planets or anything else. God gives us the ability to do lots of things. Not everything that we have the ability to do is a good thing. It's always worthwhile asking, just because it's possible, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And yet, on the whole, I think it's been good when people have moved to other places. I think all of us are richer for there having been communication among different cultures. We've learned so much from the people in the East, out here in the West. We've gained so many wonderful... A world that never saw the New World wouldn't have chocolate, Come on. Can find God revealed in the beauty of science. How can I find him in, a child who's ill or an act of terrorism done in God's name? The latter one is easier because I think it's clear that is evil chosen by a human being out of fear, out of stubbornness. I spent yesterday with a couple who have a 4-year-old, and they said it's astonishing. He's already at the stage where he will do things that not only he knows he isn't supposed to do, but things that he knows he really doesn't want to do, and he'll do them anyway. That's not only free will, that's original sin. And we're all born in it. The harder thing is, how do you account for natural evil? Diseases, earthquakes, things that kill people. And there isn't an easy answer. The problem of evil has been around as long as philosophers. I'm not going to come up with an answer. I wrote an article about the tablet after the tsunami, and I haven't gotten any brighter than when I wrote that. And the best I could come up with then was, tsunami kills 100,000 people, and you say it's an incredible tragedy. But again, it doesn't kill 100,000 people. It kills one person and repeats that 100,000 times. But every one of us is going to die. And that tragedy, my dad's 99 years old, doing great, thank God.